Hi, I'm Melissa Fisher, and I'm here to talk all things property. So join me with some industry experts to discuss some bite-sized pieces of information that make the world of difference. I'm here with Brendan O'Leary this afternoon. Welcome, Brendan. Now, everyone,
thank you, Melissa.
Brendan is an amazing property developer. He is Queensland-based. He's been in the industry for around the 23 years, so I hear. Hard to believe, actually. I've known Brendan for a couple of years and absolutely love what he does. So welcome. Very excited to have you on the call today, Brendan.
Great to be here, Melissa. Great to spend time with you.
Thank you. Now, a few things we want to touch off on today, which I know you're very experienced in, is overlays, some workflow and timelines that are affected by those. So if you don't mind, the first thing I would like to know when we're talking overlays is, let's talk national, state-based, local-based. And where do you find them first? How do you first find out about overlays?
Well, they are the very, very first thing that you'll make an inquiry on a property. I looked at 3 already today, and the very first thing was I ran a properties report, which is a Queensland-based, Southeast Queensland-based system where they draw out of the council databases, or you can go to your local council, property development online, and draw a lot of this information out. So you're exactly right. They run across all 3 tiers of government, but the state ones are normally the hardest to get past. Local ones, acid sulfates, that sort of thing, they can be dealt with reasonably, what we call consulted out. So let's say you have a fire overlay, which is what I had on this development where I am today. I had a bushfire hazard overlay. So I engaged a bushfire consultant to prove that that wasn't actually the case, and council then removed that from them. So without getting too far ahead of ourselves, Melissa, but you'll find that overlays are not entirely accurate, especially flood overlays, those sorts of things, because they're done on modelling, not on fact.
So we would be able to say that they're a trigger for more information to be retrieved. And generally, if you're looking at it from our perspective, from a development perspective, we want to know that it's no longer an issue either. But it's not a hard and fast yes or no, is it? You come across.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. So at the end of the day,
there are some to be avoided.
Yes, absolutely. So at the end of the day, what I really would like to get across to a lot of people is it's not always hard. That you can come across, and generally will come across, multiple overlays at any sort of property development that you're looking at, no matter how large or small. It's not the end of the world. There is a process to go through. There's information that can be retrieved around them. And most of them, like you say, and I love the terminology there, that they can be consulted out. But it also gives you broader information about what you can and can't do on that particular parcel of land or property too, doesn't it?
It does, and it's really interesting. Without getting off topic, it comes back to the team that you surround yourself with. So everything in development is about your team, and we'll go into this a little bit further down, but we had a koala overlay dropped on us. It turns out that our environmental consultant is the one that wrote the policy for state government for koala habitats. So you want to have that guy on your team.
Absolutely, you do. Absolutely. Nothing better than having the one that wrote the policy. I like the way you pulled that together. That is very nice. How difficult was the koala overlay to deal with? It's because this is not something that a lot of places are going to hear of. It's going to be quite an isolated scenario. So how
correct. Koala overlays are an absolute nightmare. So we were extremely lucky in that we were about $500,000 into the development, and we don't have a DA yet. And they dropped the koala overlay onto the property. So a koala overlay will restrict every single thing. You cannot touch really anything within that koala overlay. Like in this particular property where they dropped it on us, there are trees that have fallen down over a small creek. They cannot be removed, even though they look incredibly unsafe and untidy, because they're considered habitat. So no trees can be removed from a koala habitat unless they're harmful to that species. So all of the landscaping design and that sort of thing, we were quite lucky in that, back to my original point, we had an excellent architect draw the original design. And whilst that area didn't have a koala overlay, it is flood affected and as such has a biodiversity overlay. So a lot of the same rules apply. How we increase the yield on that is we cantilevered the townhouses so that, sorry about the crudity of the design, so that we cantilevered the townhouses out above the biodiversity area whilst being inside the boundaries. We're not building on the biodiversity area. It allowed a yield of another 6 residences by doing that.
See, that's creative. That is, and you get back to having the right team around you, working with the right people. It's absolutely imperative, because I can tell you from experience sake that would not have always have been the outcome with the wrong consultants, or inexperienced consultants in that field would not have been able to come up with such a good result for you, and such creativity to be able to work with something instead of necessarily trying to bulldoze your way through to an end result. I'm interested in you say that. So koala overlay, is there any consideration to being able to translocate them or anything?
No,
along
none. So we're none at all. You're really restricted. And honestly, I didn't sleep for 2 days so there was no koala overlay, and I've been working on this project for 3 years, and overnight, no notification, bang, dropped it on us, right? So no notice.
Wow.
So where we have been extremely lucky is you are allowed, it's an equation, but in our instance, we were allowed a 500 square meter, let's call it an encroachment, right? Yep. And that allowed infrastructure. So there's an 18-meter span bridge that goes across the creek to the rear of the property, to the 17 or 18 townhouses that are at the rear. So we encroached incredibly on our design, 487 square meters. Now, in relation to the bridge, we had allowed for it to be 7.5 meters wide to have two-way traffic of, light trucks, shall we say, with a 40-ton rating, and a separate 1.4 meter pedestrian bridge so people could walk past each other with a pram. Within a koala zone, in Queensland, you're only allowed to encroach 5.5 meters wide for infrastructure. So what we did was we shortened we made the bridge less wide. We brought it down to 5.5, right to the limit. And then on the stage 2 side, we're planning it's called a composite bridge. It's actually made by the Wagner family, and they're a self-supporting polymer type material that won't corrode, won't get eaten by ants. And we're putting that pedestrian bridge separate to the vehicular bridge, and we're putting in what we're calling a habitat viewing platform at the center of the bridge. Now, the idea, of course, is when you are on the boundary line, you get more flexibility, as with all things, bushfire zones, all those sort of things. You'll get more flexibility by having that within a meter of the boundary line. We're not creating any backflow. So the bridge, I know we're getting a little off topic, but the bridge is 8 meters inside the boundary, so that on a serious flood event, if the water hits the piers, you're not creating backflow hydraulically into an adjoining property. That would disperse out. But whereas with the pedestrian bridge and the habitat viewing platform, which I love, it can be considered infrastructure,
weren't we? So the wording around things has got to be imperative.
It absolutely is. But at the same time, my business partner and I are absolutely committed to protecting the environment. We've had Land for Wildlife, environmentalists all come through.
It's interesting you say that and bring it up, because going back to that creative way of doing things, so you can work with it instead of trying to bulldoze your way through what is never going to give you a good end result, ends up in a good end result for everybody. So you still got a good development. The koalas are still protected. There's a nice viewing platform for them. Your bridge work works. That required a huge amount of people to coordinate and be at that creative level to be able to achieve it. I asked you about being able to translocate. We have a very similar situation with some crayfish and giant earthworms. And because we're working with our biodiversity team, we have the ability to be able to translocate them and now create an educational aspect where they can monitor what happens, and the school kids not that far away can come, they can actually be a part of the whole process and learning about the biodiversity side. So those give backs back into projects are what a lot of the community don't get to hear about and see. That actually goes on. So I think it's quite important to mention that, because what you're doing is protecting a particular species and wildlife, while you're still making a product that's fantastic for your end user, which I absolutely love. There's a lot of effort that goes into that.
And you raised an excellent point there, Melissa, and don't butt heads with council. You will not win. Work with them, try to come up with a sensible common ground. Yep. As a younger man, I tried to force my way through things with projects. Oh, don't be an idiot. That tree's not important. Work with council, because it's really interesting as you get older, you discover this, that they are just trying to do their job. They don't want to be shouted at and abused. So be polite, welcome them, talk to them about the project. We had 3 council complaints in the first week, right? By a particularly aggressive, green orientated neighbor, that we were destroying the wildlife, cutting down melaleucas and, protected habitat. And what's really interesting is when council came out, they said, "You're like, what are you doing here?" And I said, no, come in, and he said, "Oh, I want to record the conversation." That's fine, film it, come on in, we'll show you what we're doing. And we had already had our environmental guys through, and they identified every single species of tree with a tag. They had been surveyed on their location. This is what we're doing. We're not, we're introduced species like pine trees, we were removing them. So here's the interesting thing, when the 3rd complaint came through, they rang me and said, "Oh, Brendan, there's another complaint coming through. I just wanted to give you the heads up." So you see the mindset change.
Absolutely.
Work with them.
Yep, absolutely. And there's a huge difference. And it's a very good point you make. They're just doing their job. They're caught up in red tape as well. It's not the ultimate desire for them either, but they're doing a job. And the more you can actually work with them, the more likely you are to get a good end result. And there's always got to be wiggle room on both sides. Right? They're
Absolutely right.
I think being able to acknowledge some of their challenges goes a long way with getting people out there to a project, having a look at it and working with you from council, because I can tell you can't get through without them. So may as well learn to work.
And trust me when I say, you upset them, you're going to the bottom of the pile for a considerable amount of time. You'll get an RFI on day 28.
Yeah.
And then another 14 days to reply. And after 12 months, I won't talk about the council, but I know there was a development that had to be signed off from an engineering firm. The council came back to the developer and said, "Find another engineering firm to sign this off." And he said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Because in 2011, they were incredibly rude to us, that engineering firm.
Oh.
10 years earlier.
Oh, my Lord.
And they just stonewalled them, absolutely stonewalled them.
Wow.
So, which again is a criteria for your team. Look at the relationship that they have with local council.
It is so true, and I can't emphasize that more, that it is the importance of having the right people around you. And it's about working together. It's a whole lot of fun when you're actually working together, whether it's with council or with your own team. It's very important. It really is. And you get someone like that holds something up. My gosh, the time frame on that would have been incredible. That would have hurt. That would have been a massive.
Yeah, that probably cost him 50 grand to go to another engineering firm.
So it's sad first to think that they weren't able to sort things out, that engineering firm, to council, but even more so that it had a massive impact on the developer with no knowledge nor understanding of what was going on 10 years earlier. So research who you're working with. Actually know who you're working with.
Every time.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's the little cues, Melissa. So you go to your pre-start meeting, right? And they go, "Oh, who's your civil engineer?" "Oh, Bruce Civil." "Oh, fantastic. Those guys are great." And you go, right. They have a good relationship, So, it all comes back to your team.
Professional, the ones that deal with the council professionally, great big tick in my box. Because they're representing you on their own business as well. We say it's all.
Well, it's a two-way street, Melissa, of course.
Of course it is. Of course it is. So
You
talk
have to be
me about
professional,
your,
polite, be a good payer.
well, the thing is that you're not going to get anywhere if you're not. And we can all have bad days and grizzle about what is and what isn't, and the fact that they've just dumped a koala overlay on me. But at the end of the day, you've still got to work through it. So the longer you're going to grizzle for, the longer it's going to take to work through it. And eventually, if you want what you want, you're going to have to learn to work with people and make those resolutions along the way. So you may as well do it from the beginning. To be perfectly honest, we all say time is
You're
money.
absolutely right. And if you're doing your numbers, whatever you've allowed for consultants, double it.
Yeah.
In your
I
fee
would
zones.
always say,
Just double the number.
your consultants are a very, very good insurance policy right off the bat. You know, before you start, you spend a lot of money on consultants, but it's a very good insurance policy. It's going to ensure
It
that
really
if you
is.
selected your team well, that you're going to have an amazing outcome on a project before you start butting heads with anyone or wasting money on needless earthworks. That are going to get you nowhere. So no, I totally agree with you. So your overlay, let's talk about that koala overlay and what it did to your timeline.
Funnily enough, it took 21 days to resolve because the architect had done such an extraordinary job from the beginning, you know, a greenfield site. So it's a 3-hectare site or 6-acre site with an existing home on it. That's all that was there. And of course, on that component, we're putting 52 townhouses. So we were extremely lucky, but I was worried that because we had cantilevered the homes into the koala overlay, that they would bounce that. And, you know, like you're sort of going back to scratch then, because all your traffic design, your sewerage infrastructure, all that, you start over. So let's say 2 weeks in the delay. So we dodged a major bullet because we did it right. Start as you intend to continue. We got it right to start with. I have a drawing. I'll share an electronic drawing of the development so you can see how huge the koala overlay is.
So it could have been a whole lot worse though, couldn't it? If you didn't have those professionals on board to start off with. Or, you know, let's say that was something that could have been picked up right at the very start of due diligence and no one had picked it up and you had designed totally differently. What could that have done to a project?
Oh, completely killed it. Completely and utterly killed it. So let's say, so on this particular development, there's 2 pre-cleared areas, right? Which obviously we're building on them. A builder taught me a couple of years ago, don't try and adjust the land to fit the building. Do it the other way around. It's far, far cheaper and you get a far better outcome. And it's so true. And that's what we did here. So it could have completely and utterly killed the project, because you can argue with state, you'd be looking at 2 years. Now, when you're carrying a massive amount of debt to finance the property, you know, pay engineers and all that sort of thing, even if it's just our cash flow, it could easily have killed it. And it was only because we didn't have our DA lodged. Now, here's the interesting thing. They could have gone over the DA, but it's risky. And from a litigious point of view, they probably wouldn't. So get your DA right and get it lodged is the most critical piece of information there. DA is a development approval, and it's pretty much generic across Australia.
Approvals, planning approvals, same thing, depending
same
on
thing.
the country that you actually come from. Yeah, small difference in terminology occasionally. So again, the point that I want people to understand here is you're going to come across them. Not all of them are quite as harsh as a koala overlay, but if you've got the right people to start off with, due diligence is imperative. You want to know as early as you can. Secondly, I love your comment on being able to design accordingly. Design as you wish to continue. Let's not be trying to hide anything or patch something up with a design right in the onset, because it's only going to cost you in the long run. Why are we wasting time when we can bring something up, we can work with it, we can create good end results? Move forward as you've started, I think is a very important thing to give consideration to, but understanding that if you are going to play the game and you want to butt heads with council and fight this, the timeframes involved. Why would you? A 2-year wait on something, the holding costs on
Leave
that.
it for the amateurs.
It's just crazy. And again, my question there is why would you want to? Why?
And you wouldn't.
No.
And the other overlay that is extremely problematic is, of course, flood.
Yeah.
Don't yes, it is done on modeling, but there's minimal flexibility. So you might get a good hydraulic engineer in to do all the calculations and prove and I have photos of this property in the height of the 1974 floods on a Polaroid of all things.
Oh.
And yeah, no, may as well have been on a stone tablet, a clay tablet. So council don't care. So they run on their own. Sometimes you can get satellite imagery, but it's very rare going back 50 something years.
And you guys up there have an amount of flooding that goes on, right? In reference to, so I'm not going to say we don't have it down here, we do. And there's a lot of modeling that is done around it. I totally agree. If you're going to take something on like that, you've got to understand the challenges that you're up against. And I think more so at that point, you've got to be looking at what the end result is. What are you trying to achieve? And is it actually achievable? Because for some, I say they are, but it's not a starting position. This is not, you don't want to be going into a project like that, A, thinking it's going to be quick, or B, thinking it's going to be easy. You want a lot of experience, or at least a very experienced team behind you, knowing that what you're going to deliver is very, very beneficial, A, to the community and definitely to your council. There's got to be some massive
100%. But I will tell you something that I found about 2 or 3 years ago, which is extraordinarily interesting. There's a completely flood affected block about 10 k's from here. And it is a beautiful property, but Noah would build on it. He would be about the only one.
Yep.
And so there was, the floodplain went right up to the edge of the designated road, gazetted road. A very, very clever developer realized that the land at the rear of the property, which was not accessible by the road, was not flood affected. So what he did was he did the earthworks. So he hasn't adjusted the volumetric mass, for lack of a better term, of the floodplain, but he moved that earth to the front of the property and picked up 89 blocks.
Love it. Absolutely.
Now, you've got to respect people that see the long game.
Look, when you've got the time, and I say you've got to have the time to be able to do that, that's not just a quick get in and get out process, but when you've got the time and the insight to create something, there's definite benefits there. But for anyone that's starting in the game, I would not recommend it as a starting position.
No.
I love his thought process. I love the creativity there. I really do. And again, that desire to create something that's beneficial. There's a lot said for being able to have good conversation with council, but we work with our water authorities and everyone as well. Have good conversation with why it is what it is and what it is they're trying to achieve out of it. Because again, there's no point in trying to push through something to find out the water authority wants a wetland there. That's what they're working towards, and you're trying to head in the opposite direction. It doesn't make sense. So again, working with people, you'd be surprised what you can actually achieve.
And working with people, it's interesting you say that. I tend to steer clear of political representatives, elected representatives, when I'm talking about anything council related. So most Australian councils work this way. They don't have a great deal of authority. It is the admin staff that have the authority. Yes, it may go into a planning meeting and all that sort of thing and hope that they're on your side. But yeah, don't waste your time with the elected officials. Spend your time developing good, ethical, strong relationships with people in the admin side of the council.
I agree. I totally agree. We have had many conversations with our economic development team in council. They are a wealth of knowledge when it comes down to what council wants, what they want to achieve, their main game, the big picture for them, who will and won't come into town and for what reasons. A lot of dollar figures behind what they do, which is great, because again, if we can work with what they want, what they're trying to achieve, you're miles in front. They're giving you half the information to start off with. They've got a vested interest in it too when they're doing what they do because they love it. They want to see a good outcome. Like I said earlier, they can get caught up in red tape. We all know that. It's what it is, but they're doing the best they can with the information that they've got and the position that they're in. They're just doing their job. May as well
And
be a
be,
part of it.
be completely ethical when you're dealing with them.
It's all about it.
Completely and utterly ethical, because they will burn you in the blink of an eye if they think there's something untoward going on.
Yeah. You've got to have good intention behind what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Why do it?
That said, on larger projects, and I mean larger, not land developments, infrastructure projects, I make certain that my federal connections are the elected officials, because you're never going to get near the admin side. And I have a wonderful relation with both sides of politics at a federal level. I'm talking about our stadium project at this stage, so we'll go into that later at another time. But all of that conversation starts and continues with the federal elected officials. And then they will bring in the local and state further down the road.
You don't have to be giving consideration to either side of politics either. They're all there. I think you need, and you mentioned earlier, you need to be able to build those good relationships and leave the political side out of it. They play a part. They're there. They have the contacts. They have the information. And if you can leave the politics out of it and have a good relationship with both sides, there's no reason why you can't achieve what you want to achieve.
If we jump back to overlays, one that we have in Queensland from a particularly dopey elected official is acid sulfates.
Okay.
They wanted to use a local dam or pond, wetlands area, and they brought excavators in and dug through acid sulfates. And then, of course, the entire area was covered with an acid sulfate overlay.
Oh, really?
When you see them, immediately look at the depth that's recommended for the acid sulfates, because quite often it's 12 meters, and unless you're building a underground train network, you're never going to go near it. That's one that's come up a lot recently. Bushfire. I know in my local council they run a system where you can offset, shall we say. So if you want to clear trees on a block,
Yes.
they say, no, you can't touch them because they're protected unless you pay $220,000. Then we'll allow you to do it.
Yeah, we have the same. It's a growth area. They're looking for development. So what is protected and should remain, if you're prepared to pay the offsets, which are substantial amounts of money, then a whole heap of the most appropriate trees get planted elsewhere to accommodate. Yes, the legislation around things, or lack thereof, or the I suppose solutions that they've brought in to accommodate both sides are interesting at times. I know it's not every council that has, whether you want to call it a luxury around that. But yeah, we certainly have the same here. You brought up bushfire bushfire overlay before. Is that something that is a very common thing in Queensland?
Oh, completely. Especially through this area, it's heavily treed, and coming from a fire background, there's a lot of buildup of A-class material, dead leaves, roots, trees, that sort of thing. It becomes a tinderbox. It's a very hot climate up here. Someone walks by, someone throws a bottle out a window, and next thing a fire's running through a residential area. We're on 2,000 square meter blocks here as a minimum. But we wake up to the sound of kookaburras, which is absolutely wonderful. But yes, is the short answer. But as I said in the beginning, it can be consulted out, because you can put in place, you can do selected clearings. I'm a very, very big fan of true natives and never touching them. Introduce species and that sort of thing, clear them out, get some nice low grow underneath, get a good a landscape architect to come up with a plan, which is part of our DA process now. Our planning approval process is to have a landscape architect do their thing. So it's not one that would stop me. When I look at a property and it's completely covered with a biodiversity or a flood, I'm pretty much out at that point.
Yep.
I kind of stop looking and move on, because if the entire property is flood affected, what are you doing? You're just wasting your time.
It's hard work, and like I said, unless you walked into it and you've got a whole lot of time on your hands, or there's a massive benefit to the community at the other side, and you've got a whole council team or state government team that are helping you work with it, then yeah, it's going to be very, very challenging. And it's not one of those that you want to timeline into your life saying this is how it's going to stack up with my cash flow and this is how it's going to work in amongst other projects. But bushfire up there was obviously easy enough for you guys to deal with. Again, we have it down here. Ours has actually escalated quite a bit just on the recent years of some serious bushfires that we've had. So they've escalated the bushfire reporting, the need for, and I'm going to say less wiggle room than what there used to be, but they're introducing a lot of new materials, which I'm finding very interesting because I like to see creative ways around some of the challenges that we're up against. And they're not all council-based challenges. They've been challenges that may have been introduced by way of the bushfires, and now we're finding solutions around making sure that livelihoods are safe. And some of the materials are quite interesting to see what they're actually bringing in to accommodate a lesser setback for bushfire.
Sure. And one of the things that we did, one of the things we did at Timor on the 52 townhouses is where they were cantilevered out, the planting underneath that cantilevered area, the Xanadu was the plant that was selected for exactly that reason. It doesn't burn. Now, the cantilevered section has to be fire rated, but you don't want to put, Class A material there.
No, you don't. Isn't it interesting though? They're simple solutions.
Yep.
What can be seen as quite a complex problem, which I say is really just a challenge that we need to be creative around and find better solutions. You overcame that easily though with good consultants.
And here's something that everybody forgets about, and it's not really an overlay, but it should be: high voltage cables.
Oh, yes.
My personal position hasn't shifted on this.
Yep.
Just so you know, let's say you do a land subdivision underneath or outside the easement of HV cables, high voltage cables. It's extremely difficult for those purchasers to get mortgage insurance, and I'm not a fan. Given the market in Queensland and the rest of Australia, I don't know about the western states, but in the eastern states, the developers are running right up to the easement and selling straight away right next to HV cables. So
no, see, I'm going to run with you on that. I think a lot more thought needs to be given to the end user. We know so much more now than what we ever did. And this is, I guess, Brendan, where you get to say some developers will give consideration to the outcome and others won't. It's just about smashing it out. And I'm sorry, I don't align with that. I think if you're going to be creating a short-term thinking, yeah, that is something that you absolutely have to be factoring in. And again, why would you want to start developing around something that you know is an issue and you know that it's going to create issues for, and not just financially, but I'm going to say, let's look at health-wise as well. Why would you? Sorry,
the other thing, definitely not, and to go completely off topic, and some of you people that watch this particular podcast, is I did a course just last week on asbestos removal and the safer. You have to be in Queensland. You have to be certified to even work as a labourer, because asbestos is horrible. But here's the interesting thing that they talked about. First of all, we've known about asbestos for 5,000 years. The Romans wrote about it, so there is no surprise. I know. But what's interesting is health inflicted asbestos issues are on the rise because people are tearing out and renovating bathrooms themselves without checking if it's actually asbestos. So I think it's just a really important, like it's a public health announcement. Please take care. If you are planning a renovation, spend the $50 or whatever it is, just to find out whether that product is asbestos.
That is a fantastic piece of advice for everyone that's listening, because I totally agree with you. We just want to save that little bit of money up front and we're going to do it ourselves, but you actually understand what you're working with. And it may only be a little bit of asbestos. So funnily enough, So a little bit of information for you. Quite some years ago, I did some contract work for Esso, so ExxonMobil. We were digging up some of their old lines and stripping the asbestos coating off them. So know all about the licenses that you've got to go through. Types of asbestos that there are. Some are not as bad for you and some are horrendous. And it is common knowledge now. It's not hard to find out the health risk that goes with it. So for the few dollars it's going to cost you to find out what you're dealing with, I totally agree. Great piece of advice to people. Just find out. Make sure that you're not putting yourself at risk for the sake of saving a few dollars.
And your family. A 22-year-old died of asbestosis about 2 years ago, and he was a young child when his parents renovated the home. Youngest death in Australia as a result of it. Horrible, horrible stuff. So please, I urge you, check before you start tearing things out.
Very, very good advice there. Do you come across it much with what you do?
I don't like bulldozing homes. So if a home can be saved, think back to when you wanted to buy your first home. You remember how difficult it was?
Yeah.
So I'm not a fan of bulldozing homes. So interestingly, on one of the sites we're doing, there is an existing home built in December 1968, and of course it's full of asbestos. Even to demolish the house, we have to remove every skerrick of asbestos, $14,000 or $15,000, before you can run an excavator through the home. So what we're doing is stripping it out, and I'm actually going to move it onto the property here as a granny flat, because it's a great salt, and there's a wood shortage. What are they going to do with that? That'll end up in a scrap heap.
We don't repurpose things enough anymore. We've become a very
absolutely
society on a lot of levels. It's a shame because we also look at our architecture and say, well, we're not that old. And yet
I am.
We're still
don't let the eyebrows fool you. I'll tell you something very interesting, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Just a personal goal that I achieved is this particular development was 100% recycled. So any driveways, concrete slabs, that was recycled in alignment with United Nations guidelines. Any trees non-native trees that came down, they were mulched or used for firewood. All the steel was collected separately and recycled. So and it really wasn't that difficult. And funnily enough, we got paid for the scrap metal.
It's interesting when you say that we just cleaned up a site and yes, you'd be surprised how much you can get paid for scrap metal when you're prepared to separate things out. But I love the thought around it though, Brendan, to be able to go to that extreme, it's not that hard.
It really isn't.
No. And the benefits for the environment and community and everything else. Again, we say, why wouldn't we? At this point in time, why aren't we giving more consideration to those sort of things on every job that we do?
Yep,
something for a lot of people to think about, I think, as you're moving forward into different developments is how much can you recycle? How much effort can you put into separating things and making sure that we're reusing consistently? Concrete's a great thing to reuse. It is what it is, whether we like what it's made of or not is irrelevant, it's there. But if you can repurpose and reuse things, why wouldn't you?
And it's quite amusing. So we're getting completely off subject, but I actually purchased a truck, bobcat, and an excavator to do this subdivision, and I've just sold them, right? And after 3 years, I sold them for the exact price that I bought for, and had all that work. But it's really amusing is you take the truckload of concrete waste to the recyclers, and whilst you're there, you pick up the concrete road base that will be your product in a couple of weeks' time, and drive back out and pay a large sum of money. It's quite hilarious.
It is. It absolutely is. I've got to say, I'm impressed with the amount of recycling we can do these days. I'm not so impressed with the amount that it gets used. I think that for all of us, there's a lot more we can do from the recycling side of things. It's just putting that little bit of extra thought into it. It really is not much more effort in the whole grand scheme of things. The biggest, I think, misconception is it takes extra time, and time is money. It doesn't. It takes extra organizing.
It really doesn't.
It does not take extra time. It's just extra organizing right up front. One thing I do want to ask you, for the sake of all the viewers, so if we are talking overlays and you have had something thrown at you midway through a process, which you did, a koala overlay, thank you very much. Workflow, how do you work around something like that? Or do they always bring you to a standstill? Is there anything you can do or be doing at that point in time to continue to move through a process while you're working on that? Or is it a total standstill?
Okay, so the first thing is respond, don't react, right? I know it's fundamental, but that's the most important thing. You need to then look at your workflow and separate out your consultant's activities. So you don't want to stop work on your civils if you believe that they aren't going to be affected. So focus on the team that will directly influence that output. In other words, your environmentalist, your surveyor, and almost certainly your town planner and possibly your landscape architect. So focus on those guys, get that team together. And it comes back to a point that I didn't make, is when you're selecting your team, is you have to make sure that they want to work together as well.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's so silly when you say it out loud, but you'll come across a consultant and say, hey, listen, that guy dudded me on a project. I don't really want to work with him. He's gone. Don't ask about it again. So
absolutely. And you know, it's interesting you say that, Brendan. You spoke about it earlier with council, you know, making sure that we work together and it's a team effort and all these things. It's got to be collective, isn't it? You've got a council that won't work with an engineer. We want to make sure that your whole internal team want to work together as well, because productivity and
absolutely
imperative, isn't it?
And your goal is DA at that point. So your first goal is DA. Do not let anything distract you from achieving that goal.
Oh, that's a good thing. Focus, isn't it?
Okay. So, and you and I know this, but some of your viewers won't, is that you get a massive uplift in your property value when development approval, because you'll go from being a resi property to be a developable property. So there's all sorts of guidelines around that, and I won't go into it, but you know, as of right, DAs and that sort of thing change things. But if you're looking to raise more funds, get your DA in place.
Very, very good point. And you did nail it. A lot of people don't give it consideration. They're caught up in the whole development side of things instead of looking at the increase in value just at DA point and making that decision again, where to from here. I've got a plan A, B, C, and D. This is an exit strategy if I need it. What was the value uplift? How well did I do time-wise? And what is my value uplift? And go again, make a choice.
Well, it also opens up an opportunity from a purchaser's perspective that your developer may just put an option on and put 10 grand down, as we call hurt money, run the DA, which depending on the size of it may cost between 10,000 and 300,000. But the uplift is quite extraordinary. And then you on-sell that property. And that I have dear friends that's their entire living, and they make a very good one.
Totally agree. And with no issue with that. There is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. And how well do you think they know a system to be able to do that time after time after time?
I like it because they're adding value. You know, like we've all done the flip where you just grab a property, someone hasn't realized its potential, you throw an option on it, put and call, whatever the case may be, and pick up a couple of $100 grand, right? But when you actually get those approvals in place, you're actually adding something. You've contributed something.
For sure. And you've saved someone else a whole heap of time, because now whoever's going to buy that off you and come in and build haven't got to spend all that time in the DA process. Right? So you've taken a chunk of time out of a developer's workflow or time frame, made their life easy. Of course, they're happy to pay for that. And for anyone that's looking at buying a property with a DA or planning approval already on it, be mindful to make sure that all of the feasibilities stack up and the work is, so the development is actually viable, not just council have stamped it to say, yeah, go, that it stacks up, because I'd hate to think
it is the pathway or the bridge from the minor leagues to the majors.
Absolutely.
It really is.
Of course it is.
Yeah. Because suddenly you're not on your own, and then you've got a DA approved property. Some larger players will want to come and talk to you.
Absolutely, they will. Yep, they definitely will. And it opens up a whole new world. It opens up a whole new world for you if you're prepared to do those sort of things. I credit people for doing it, because there's a lot in getting a DA on some properties.
Well, you have to know what you're doing. Yeah, don't kid yourself. It's not an easy process.
You've got to be able to work in.
don't come into property development if you think you're going to make a quick buck, because it is extraordinarily difficult.
The biggest
it
misconception, quick. Oh, look, and please, I take nothing away from some quick flips and things like this. You absolutely can. Property development is not about a quick dollar. You've got to absolutely want to create good end results. I personally believe you've got to have a level of community orientation and want for better things, and definitely want to work with other people on greater end results to be a property developer successfully.
And you better know how to stand back up after you've been knocked down, because trust me, it'll happen. We call it, okay, so my friend came up with this thing. He said, make your property development like a monorail rather than a roller coaster. And the way you do that is get your team, and you're not going through this emotional roller coaster. You know, your bank calls in the debt, or 1,000 other things that go wrong on a daily basis. If you've addressed them and you smooth the ride out, that's the monorail ride. That's where you want to be.
And you can't expect that there's no challenge. It's just how you deal with it is different.
Be ludicrous.
You can put
absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah, there will always be challenge. If there wasn't, everyone would do it.
That's right. And in 20-something years, I've never done a development that there weren't major challenges that you're just about, you know, you're like a 4-year-old in Kmart, you're crying so much at night. You know, you go, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And the next day something happens to go, yeah, that's right. I remember why.
That's why I'm doing it. Yeah, this is what I said. It's that end result that you're trying to achieve, isn't it? You're not hung up on just the dollar side of it and I want to make a buck. There's a bigger picture.
You'll
here.
fail.
And there's great desire. Oh, I totally agree. Well, my friend, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been super exciting, as it always is, to talk with you.
Oh,
thanks for
love spending time with you.
Absolutely love it. I'm coming up as soon as I can. Right.
Versace, here we come.
There's a beer to have, I can tell you right now. So I
absolutely
the fact that you've actually spent some time with us, but given up your time, because I know how precious time can be and how busy you actually are. And I
thought I dressed appropriately for Queensland. I've got my Billabong shorts and shirt on, so you know that guy's a Queenslander for sure.
They're going to know you're a Queenslander, trust me. So,
oh yeah.
So that's us for overlays, a little bit of workflow and timeframes around them. I'd love to have you back again at another time. I'd certainly love to be able to share some of your current projects with the audience. Show them what it's all about.
What we might do is take the camera to the site, and we can do a walk around, a drone fly, whatever you want to do. By the way, you want to be a developer, learn how to fly a drone.
There you go. See, a new skill.
Go find one.
A new skill, right? You're on.
It's extraordinary how much it will help you, and it will help you personally. Sorry to go off topic, but it'll help you personally because you'll see the progression that you're making on the site, as well as your end users will see it as well. So it becomes a great marketing tool.
It's not just about paper anymore, is it? Now technology gives us that ability to see things in real time. Astonishing what it can do. People are visual. You want to be able to see things. And especially when you're stuck behind a desk, you want to actually see what's going on. So good job.
Absolutely. Well, wonderful to spend time with you as always, Melissa. Take care.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it. You too.